Good morning, everyone. Is this working? Yeah. The time is 8:30, and I'd like to call this special meeting of the Belton Independent School District Board of Trustees to order. Meeting has been duly called. Notice of the meeting has been posted in accordance with the Texas Open Meetings Act, Texas Government Code, Chapter 551. First item on the agenda is public comments. I see that we have people signed up. So, in accordance with District Policy BED Local, any person wishing to address the board during public comments must submit a public comments form. Public comments during a special meeting shall be limited to the items on the agenda. In order to comply with the Texas Open Meetings Act, board may not respond to comments or otherwise discuss or act upon any issues that are not posted on the meeting agenda. Each participant shall be limited to 3 minutes in accordance with the board's operating procedure. Speaking to board members in a disrespectful or threatening tone is unprofessional and counterproductive to a cause. We have a timer on the screen that shows your allotted time, and a sound will occur at the conclusion. The first person to speak, when you come to the podium, please state your name and city of residence for the record. So the first person to speak is Tad Smith and Alex Bruce. You are on deck.
Good morning. Can you hear me? Hello? 1, 2, 1, 2.
A little bit if we could.
1, 2.
That'd be great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
My name is Tad Smith, and I live here in Belton. First of all, let me say that I recognize that each one of you are concerned about the well-being and the education of children, or you wouldn't be on the school board. And for that, I thank you. Secondly, in my years of living, I've observed that there are two basic motivations for a person's decisions and subsequent actions. Those two motivations are fear or love. When our decisions are based on fear, the actions that follow are typically negative and stifle what is good, true, and beautiful. It is said that the fear of man will prove to be a snare. Conversely, decisions based in love bring life and hope. It is said that love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. Fear or love? I've come this morning to appeal to you to let love be the basis for your decisions. Please immediately pull the evil, pornographic books from our libraries. Don't let the fear of a lawsuit or the potential actions of certain groups keep you from doing what is right. Some of you have said that you wouldn't want your children or grandchildren to read these books. So then let your love for the children of this school district cause courage to rise up in your hearts. Fear or love? Cowardice or courage? I close my remarks with the following caution. But whoever causes one of these little ones who believe in me to stumble, it would be better for him to have a heavy millstone hung round his neck and to be drowned in the depth of the sea.
Thank you. Alex Bruce, you are next, and Hillary Hicklin, you are on deck.
Hello, my name is Alex Bruce, and I'm a resident of both Temple and Belton. I would like to bring to light the book banning and in my opinion, the restriction of the knowledge and experiences that children are not being able to have due to the restriction of these books. The first thing that I would like to say is that 7 of the 21 books, meaning 1/3 of the books that are planning on being banned, are LGBT books. And there are a lot of youth that get a lot of community from having their experiences in books, especially when they are not able to openly express themselves. Another thing that I would like to bring to light is that 4 of the 21 books are about people of color and their experiences, especially with racism and police brutality, which are both real experiences that happen in our life today and are important to have that sense of community of when things like that happen. A few of these other books are about, so another one of these books is Now That We're Men, which is talking about combating sexism and sexual violence, and the harmful expectations of masculinity, and the age rating is 12 plus. It's supposed to be for people that are trying to learn and need to know these things of sexism and sexual violence, which are things that happen day to day and are hard to go through. Another book is Bridge to Terabithia, which is a book that was written in the 70s and has been a part of many children's childhoods for years and years. This was a book that I was told to read in 5th grade. It's at an 8th grade reading level, and taking this out of libraries would be counterintuitive due to the content in it has very mild and infrequent profanity and the child death in it, but the child death is something that happens. It's an awful thing that happens, but it can give comfort to people that have experienced the death of a childhood friend. Thank you.
Thank you. Hillary Hicklin, you are up, followed by Emily Latham.
Hillary Hicklin, Belton, Texas. Members of the board, because no changes have been made to the policy, I have to assume that you're moving forward as is. Let me first say, I genuinely like this policy. It is good and ensures that any book cannot be removed on a whim or based on one person's point of view and opinion. I absolutely approve of the process included in this policy and the policy itself for books of disputable matters, such as bullying or heavy subject matter. But that is not what we're talking about here. And because the district continues to release public relations pieces to the community, assuring that the issue is only 7 books in only 1 school, I have to assume that you are grossly uninformed, despite the efforts to make the board aware of the scope and severity of the issue. It is not just 7 books, and it is not in just 1 school. Sadly, as I testified at the policy meeting, I've become aware of more books almost daily in every one of our secondary education libraries. Yesterday, I discovered a book in one of our middle schools titled, "On the Bright Side, I'm Now the Girlfriend of a Sex God." It is not my opinion, but these books are clear violations of the Texas Penal Code. For these books, no policy or detailed formal challenge is necessary. We need a penal code committee to fast-track books alleged to violate the penal code and evaluated not by opinions, but according to the code, and removed from district circulation. When I consider the role of the school board, I think we would all agree that it's to provide a safe environment for students, support educators, and partner with parents. With the book policy as it stands, libraries are not safe for students. Parents hold the undue burden with the policy to challenge books that are harmful to students, and educators are vulnerable to the TEA complaints that are sure to come. Consider the librarian who knowingly creates a display of books which includes sexually explicit material to minors. This is grounds for a TEA complaint and puts her certification in jeopardy. Of the 35 plus ISDs that have removed sexually explicit and age inappropriate material from their schools, how many have been sued? In my personal research, I have not found any. Now tell me, how many children have been exposed to pornography in our schools because of the fear of the possibility of a lawsuit? At our last policy meeting, we heard our legal expert explain that the basis for inaction thus far hinges on a plurality SCOTUS decision that actually does not hold as much weight as a majority decision and has only influenced decisions in cases where there was not solid reason for removing the materials. We have the Texas Penal Code. Thank you.
Thank you. Emily Lanham, followed by Boyd Lechiminut.
I want you to imagine that you are in front of every child who faces the consequences of these bans. What would you say to them? The children who will never gain the courage to come out to their parents, the children who will never understand how to best support their LGBTQ friends, the children who live sheltered lives, never to be exposed to these real-world topics until it is far too late, the religious children who grow up thinking that they are broken because nothing has ever challenged the ideals that they've been taught. LGBTQ youth are 4 more times more likely to attempt suicide than their peers. More than 1.8 million LGBTQ youth seriously considered suicide each year in this U.S. Those who experience the parental rejection of their parents are 8 times more likely to report attempting suicide and 6 times more likely to report high levels of depression. These children are not more prone to suicidal tendencies simply because they are queer, but rather how they are mistreated by their classmates, teachers, and family on top of the stigmatization that they face from society. Growing up with this, the idea that you as a person are fundamentally broken or wrong causes deep-rooted mental issues within these children. I ask you, do you want to be responsible for these statistics? Could you look yourself in the mirror every day knowing that your actions could kill a child? I hear many of you sit here and cry. Think of the children, thinking that you are protecting us. Yet the very children that you speak of protecting are here today speaking out against you. Are you afraid that exposure to queerness will turn your child gay? Or are you afraid that it will help your child realize and accept the fact that they are already queer? These books give us a way to see ourselves and others in a way that others could not possibly. Because when representation matters, people feel like they matter. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Boyd Lechiminut with Isabella Kapnick on deck.
My name is Boyd Lechiminut, Belton, Texas, and I appreciate this opportunity. And I want to talk about 2 different families. I know them very well. Both of them have daughters 15 to 16 years old. The first one, her mother monitors her, watches her cell phone, watches the clothes that she wears, the television programs she watches. And she went into high school as a freshman this first time. And one of the big things about in high school is that's what you're going to see, what you've invested in this child that's going to make a difference. And she put it in. And the peer pressure is really great in high school. And to see her come back and not fall into that peer pressure was amazing to me. So garbage in, garbage out. So they put good in, good's going to come out. The second girl, not so lucky. She had parents that didn't pay any attention to her. And she ended up in the foster care system. And we don't know everything that took place, but she ended up with sexual abuse in her life from those that were to watch over her. She was finally adopted by parents that are exactly like the first that I told you about. They are watching over this, monitoring her, but she is a different person. And it is a nightmare trying to bring her down to the level to where she can even be in school without being kicked out. Very disobedient, very angry. All the things that has to do with his sexual abuse, which I have read some of those books that are in the public or in the high school libraries, and it's as though they are leading them, and this is a normal thing. So we don't want to put any more of that into them. Does that make sense to you? So in their attempt to try to do this, she'd been kicked out of school several times. I just want to bring us some key words. It's called deposit. What you deposit into these children is what's going to come out of them. And if you monitor them, then you will know exactly what's going on. And you need to put the right and wrong in. And these books that are in these libraries, whether they can be there or not, we need to get them out. And there's a potential in every child that goes into this high school, and it's our responsibility as parents and grandparents to teach them the right thing, and it's your responsibility to help us to get this information that is like a computer, garbage in and garbage out. And I just want you to know that we are here to join forces with you and not to have division, but unity. Thank you.
Thank you. Last up is Isabella Knapnick. Sorry if I butchered that last name.
You honestly got it on the last. It's Zapnick, but close enough. My name's Izzy, and I am a resident of Temple, but I go to the Belton School District. And as much as I would love to talk about my own experiences with books, some of those on the list to be banned among our BISD libraries, most of my own statements and beliefs have been made by my peers who spoke today. Instead, I would like to compare the banning of books in a communist country in the 70s that my dad grew up in to our 21st century technologically advanced town. My father was born and raised in Poland under the communist bloc. He lived as many people would imagine one would live in a country so heavily controlled by their government, with little money and food, much little freedom. But he describes his experiences with books as something that gave him freedom. He was able to escape into a narrative that had many stories of fun, just imagination filled with it. As I told him about this book ban last night, because I was extremely upset about it, he was amazed. He thought in a place that was so filled with freedom, as he didn't experience that growing up, we would have such a harsh ban. He told me that he had no ban. The only ban in these communist countries were books that spoke out against communism blatantly. He was able to get Bridge to Terabithia, that was made in the 70s. This is the 70s I'm talking about. In books, as an Australian family member sent a letter to him speaking of this book. He actually stole money from his parents to go to the public library in his little town to get this book, and when he read it, it really brought him to a world full of love and imagination in a place that he wasn't able to experience out in a world that the government so heavily controlled. When I told him that this was one of the books that was being planned on children not having access to immediately in their libraries, he was amazed. He was amazed that the maturity level seemed too high for children of middle school or high school ages, as all it discusses at the very last 3 pages was witchcraft in a way that was just the imagination. It wasn't actually witchcraft, and also there was a child's death in it. But he made a statement about how at a young age, starting in kindergarten, we learned about events such as 9/11 or a lot of terrorist attacks where people die. That's not too mature for us, but however, one child dying in a book was deemed too mature for a lot of libraries and people of this town. I just wanted to bring light to the fact that in a country so controlled, they were able to have books that are being planned to be banned now. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next item on the agenda is Policy Committee Report. Dr. Smith?
I'll turn that over to Mr. Alcozer and our Policy Committee to do a review of our last meeting.
Thank you, Dr. Smith. Just one comment about the investments policy. That was in line with what TASB had reviewed for us, and I think we changed 3 words in there. Nothing of any substance. It was more for clarification purposes, so we didn't have a whole lot of discussion about that. And incidentally, this was the meeting that was held on September the 6th, 2022. most of our meeting was addressing EF Local. Of course, EF Local, this meeting was a culmination of a lot of meetings that took place, a lot of discussion. And I know in our packet today, it says that we started this back in April. Actually, it started back in last fall. And if you'll recall, we had someone come speak to us, I think it was virtually. We had an expert talk to us about what the law is as it relates to First Amendment rights. And then, of course, Governor Abbott wrote his letter to TEA, I believe in November of last year, and then TEA responded with a model policy, I believe in, Dr. Smith, was it April or May? April of this year. And then after that, TASB came out with its policy, with its guideline, I believe it was right before school was out, right? Right before school was out, right?
It was right around that time.
Right around that time. So we've been having discussions going back to the fall essentially about EF Local. And the meeting that we had September the 6th was our first reading of the policy that was brought to us by Dr. Lovesmith. And she's going to speak to us here this morning and go through that policy with us. I'm sure there'll be some questions about that. But one of the things that I want to stress to you is that we also had a discussion about EF Legal. And I want to read a couple of sentences to you about EF Legal, or that's in EF Legal, that you need to know about because we discussed it. Give me just a second here. Now, this is the legal policy that we have in place right now. That's not something that we draft. That comes from Austin. And of course, there's a federal flavor to it because there's actually a U.S. Supreme Court decision that's mentioned in this particular policy. And in EF Local, when it addresses removal of library materials, the EF Local states as follows: students' First Amendment rights are implicated by the removal of books from the shelves of a school library. A district shall not remove materials from a library for the purpose of denying students access to ideas with which the district disagrees. Now, one of the things that we've learned through this process, through legal counsel, is that when there are legal challenges, the legal challenges stem from primarily the process and how strong your policy is. So if you've got a weak policy, then you've got a problem because if your district's policy is challenged, you have a significant chance of losing that legal battle. And these legal battles are very, very, very expensive. You can tell just from the comments that we've had today that people in our district are on both ends of the spectrum, okay? That's just the way it is, all right? So what we did, and incidentally, EF Local has been the policy of this district for many, many years, right? So when we looked at EF Local, we looked at the process that was in EF Local, and we thought we need to improve this. We looked at what other districts have done. We took pieces from the model that TEA had provided us. And we've talked about what we think that our local district wants, okay? I think that in reviewing this policy, of course, you can't draft a policy that's going to please everyone, all right? But I think we have a policy that addresses the concerns that have been brought to us about certain books. And I want to stress to you that we've included parts of the model policy that was promulgated by TEA, and we've added a definition of harmful material, which is in the Penal Code, 43.24A2, and obscene material, which is in 43.21A1 of the Penal Code. And when you hear Dr. Lovesmith talk about this, she will mention to you that if there are, if it's brought to the attention through the process that we've outlined in this policy, that there is material that potentially violates these one or both of these provisions, that material can be removed where a child does not have access to that unless there's parental consent. And then that material will go through the process, and then ultimately, obviously if it's removed, it's removed. But at least a child is denied access to that material unless a parent specifically allows the child to have access to that material. We thought that was very important. I think it's a good provision. I think it addresses a lot of concerns for folks. The other thing about the model policy is the model policy, it is an onerous burden that policy puts on districts because we simply do not have the resources to read every book that's put on the shelf. It just can't happen, okay? There is a limitation as to the number of books that a committee is going to review if it goes up through the appellate process. Ultimately, if there's an appeal, it ends up at a level 2, and ultimately, of course, it can end up with a level 3. The other thing that we discussed is that, and I think Janet had stressed this at one of our meetings, is that she wanted an informal process to be done. So, for example, if you have a student at Belton High School and the parent comes and talks to the principal and says, "Look, I have a problem with this particular book. What are we going to do about it?" So, the principal is to talk to the parent, tell the parent, "Look, this is how we do things. Maybe we can work something out. You don't have to keep going through this process. If you want us to simply deny access of this book to your child, then we'll do that." And the process ends there, okay? Understanding, though, that there could be one parent that doesn't want their child to have access to a certain material or a certain book, but there may be 100 other parents that may want that. So we have to be very careful in that maybe one parent, and I think Jeff even stressed this in a video that he had put out discussing this. There may be one parent that doesn't want their child to have access to a certain book, but there may be 100 other parents that say, "No, I want my kid to read that book or have access to that book." So there's competing interests here, okay? But in short, I think the process in the policy is strong. I think at least according to legal counsel, I think this is something that would pass legal muster. It does provide an appeal process, and it does provide a process by which parents, and ultimately parents have control, okay? Every single title that is in our library in this district, parents can look it up. So if there's 400 books that they read, some article that came out on the internet, and they said, "Well, there's 400 titles here that your child shouldn't have access to." Well, go on there and look, and if you don't want your child to have access to them, all you have to do is call the librarian for that particular campus and say, "Look, I don't want my kid to have access to this." It is that simple, okay? And if you want to take it further, well, the policy allows you to take it further, okay? And I want to stress to you again, and Dr. Lovesmith will mention this, about the penal code provisions that are mentioned in the TEA policy. Those penal code provisions are in our policy, and we're going to adopt those if we vote today, as our second reading today. I think it's important to have that. And lastly, there are a couple of exhibits, one for EFA and then EFB. There are some exhibits that the complainant would have to fill out and point out to the district what parts of the material you consider to be either obscene or if they're inappropriate for whatever reason. You have a right to do that. You can point that out. And there needs to be that process in place, because otherwise, if you didn't, then it's going to lend an opportunity for abuse. If someone says, "Look, I want these 400 books removed." Well, I mean, what's wrong with them? Well, I don't know. I just heard they were bad. Okay? So we can't have that, all right? So we have to balance a lot of interests here to include the district's ability to even review these things, okay? So I think that after Dr. Lovesmith gets done with her presentation, if we have any additional questions, I think we should ask them, because this is something that is very important to all of us, okay? It's important to our district. It's been something long overdue. And we've tried to do the best we can in terms of pushing this thing through. So today's the day that we need to come together, ask questions, and really discuss it. Janet, you and Chris want to add anything to that?
Let's do that now or after Deanna.
We can do it now, yeah.
I'm sorry that the students left because I wanted to be able to address some of the things that they're concerned about. You know, one of the battles that we've had from the beginning of this whole situation is misinformation on both sides. It's been difficult to rein some of that in, and a lot of that is because people want to believe a certain thing is happening, and that's not what's happening. What I can tell you is that we are weighing very thoughtfully and very intentionally First Amendment rights with the Texas Penal Code, and trying to make sure that we do the fairest and most just thing we can do to give parents rights, access to students on varied topics, which our district has always allowed and will always allow, from every background and walk of life, but also protect children from vulgar or harmful or obscene material. We will not break the law. We will not ban books indiscriminately. We will make sure children are protected, and we're going to do what's right. And I do believe that this policy is the fairest thing we can possibly come up with, also considering and always remembering what Manuel said, parents have the bottom line choice. They've always had the bottom line choice, and they can get in there right now today and tell the librarian all the books you do not want your child to have access to. Even if this process moves slowly and you think it should go quicker, you still have a right as a parent to not let your children read those books. I think that's all I've got to say.
Chris?
Yeah, I'm also a little disappointed the students left, but I think it's important that this policy isn't actually banning any book, but it's also not keeping any book in the library, right? This policy is a framework, right, that allows for the appropriate review of material, right? Either library material or instructional material, between the two. We did hear some comments and concerns in the committee meeting around why is it that we have to review a material in its entirety? Why is it that we have to have a form, right, that you see on here? It's a 2-page form. The Penal Code does lay out a requirement to take the work at its whole. And so that's at the top of 43.21, 1A. You have to review the material as a whole. And so the requirement to have the form, right, is to really ensure the robustness of the process, so that if a material is by the committee is deemed to be excluded, or if the material is deemed to stay in, what that form allows us to do is to document the justification so that we have something that we can stand on, for better or for worse, right? This isn't on either side of this thing, right? But it's to give us what we need to keep ourselves from death by whiplash, right? Like, what we can't do is have what we don't want to do is have a decision that gets made as we go through this process that then, gets turned out, gets overturned one way or the other, and then, a year later it gets overturned the other. Like, we can't do the whiplash thing, right? We have to have a process in place that will stand and that will provide stability based around that decision. And I do think what we've put in here does bring the best of the TEA model policy, the parts that are achievable to actually implement. It does bring the best of the TASB policy, and it does bring local flavor to what we have. And so maybe we talk more after Dr. Lovesmith's presentation, but I think we've hit a lot of we've got a framework in place that allows the concerns to be addressed all through the process. And in particular, the piece of it where at the top of page 5 of 6 of VFB local, right? I mean, if a material is harmful, as deemed by the penal code, and a material is obscene as deemed by the penal code, we do have the ability to pull that upon review, and pull, I mean, off to the side with requiring parental consent, right, so that it is not available. And so I think that's a good provision to have in here. So I think the framework that we've laid out before you really does address a lot of the questions and concerns that have been out there. So, yeah, go ahead.
And one more thing, some of the books that the students mentioned, I do want to say that we don't have a list of those books that they're up for banning. That is not on the table at this moment. There's a few books of concern that some citizens have come forward with. There are few parents have come forward with that could be challenged. But some of the books mentioned here are not on that list. I think there may have been some confusion that we're making a decision today to ban all these books, and that is certainly not what we're doing. I don't want you to think that's what we're doing. Please make sure your friends understand that. We are here to be fair to students as well, 100%.
And Chris, I want to reiterate something that you mentioned. When we have these forms that you have to fill out, these exhibits, that exhibit provides us with a basis for being able to defend a challenge. In other words, if a book goes through the process and it gets removed from the shelf, and then some group comes in here and files suit against this district, then we have a sound policy in place because the person who challenged the book was thorough, and it shows that the book was not removed by some sort of arbitrary decision that was made along the lines of just simply pulling the thing off the shelf. Okay. So that's what the exhibit is there for, is to allow the individual to provide us with the evidence that's needed to sustain a challenge. And someone says, well, I don't want to have to go through that. Well, if you're saying that this book is inappropriate and you haven't even looked at it, then how do you know it's inappropriate? Okay. So, but at the end of the day, though, it also helps us as a district to be able to sustain a challenge if need be in the future, which is incredibly important in this process. So I don't think I have anything else to say other than we'll wait for Dr. Lovesmith unless anyone else has any comments or questions.
If I could just say, I appreciate our policy committee very much. You have gone through this with a deliberate intensity to come up with the best policy for the school district. You've done it by doing research. You've done it by looking at sample and model policies. You've done it by gathering guidance from legal counsel. In the role of a trustee, I can't ask for anything more. And so I appreciate our policy committee extremely, because I think you are doing your best to make sure that we're crossing our I's, or dotting our I's and crossing our T's. I got to drink more coffee. Dotting our I's and crossing our T's, but also that you're representing the over 13,000 students and families that we serve in Belton ISD. So thank you for your work. Dr. Lovesmith first or Melissa? There's two policies on here.
There are. I guess Dr. Lovesmith is here, so we'll go with her first.
So I think we'll go, I think you're asking to move item 5 up next, right? And we'll do
Yes.
4 afterward? 4 is the...
No,
is-
I'm sorry. I didn't see Dr. Lovesmith. No, we can start. I'm sorry, I didn't see Dr. Golden.
No,
We can-
Melissa Lafferty is doing item number 4,
Oh.
CDA local.
Oh, the local. Yes. No. Go. Yes. Go ahead. Sorry, my mind's on books right now.
Melissa,
Okay.
I think Jeff would like you to come on up, Melissa.
Melissa, you're going to talk to us about books? No, I'm just kidding.
Sure. I was going to let Lovesmith present the investment policy. All right, good morning. This is basically the second read to our local investment policy, which is CDA local. And TASB has made just 2 small changes to that policy, and they're small revisions. And the first revision is basically just adding a reference to the policy BDAE, which is hard for me to say for some reason, but that policy addresses the collateralization of bank deposits that exceed the FDIC see insurance coverage, which is a requirement for us on our bank deposits. The second revision is just a small clarification in language that says basically that the board reviews, not necessarily adopts, the investment policy and strategy. So it's not really an adoption, you're reviewing that investment policy. And once you have reviewed that investment policy, you've been provided basically a document in the form of a resolution, which is the written documentation that you have indeed reviewed the investment policy in accordance with the Public Funds Investment Act. And basically that resolution notes if there's any changes made. Really no significant changes in strategies or anything like that. We're still basically sitting at about a weighted average maturity of 1 year in the overall portfolio, which gives us very liquid investments so that we're able to operate. And then, of course, the primary goal of our investment policy is the safety of principal, of course, liquidity so we can pay the bills, and then maximizing our financial returns. And those are really just all the changes to that investment policy.
Any questions? No? Okay. So do we have a motion to accept the revision to CDA local as presented? Mr. Alcozer? Mr. Taggart? All right, all those in favor? All right, thank you. That passes unanimously. Now we'll get on to the next item. Next item, consider, discuss, take appropriate action regarding the following on second reading of EFB Local Instructional Resources Library Materials, EFB Exhibit Instructional Resources Library Materials, EFA Local Instructional Resources, and EFA Instructional Resources. There, now we got it right.
Good morning. I do want to bring to you today 4 policies for consideration. Many of the things I had planned to say were said by the policy committee members, and I do echo Dr. Smith's sentiments and thank you for a deep, thorough study of these policies. It has taken time, but it was time spent to do the right work, and it was a great partnership, and I do thank you as well. So I won't repeat everything, but what I will say is that yes, we have studied the policies specifically beginning in April. There was work done prior to that in the fall. Our original policy is EF Local, and EF Local combines instructional materials and library materials. And throughout our study and throughout and with our discussions, and then also with the presentation of some TASB policies, we chose to go with a route that would remove EF Local and replace it with 2 separate policies. One that would specifically address library materials, that would be EFB, and one that would specifically address instructional materials, and that would be EFA. TASB gave us an option. We could have continued with a combined policy, but as we discussed it, we felt like there's differences in those 2, and that it would be best served to have separate policies. We also decided to present different exhibits that would go with each of those policies, allowing us to specify the questions that would be addressed for library materials versus those for instructional materials. I'll first talk about EFB. That is in respect of our library materials. And just to, in support of what the committee has already said, spent quite a bit of time first focused on parental involvement and making sure that first and foremost, we do have a policy that formally recognizes a practice we've had in the past, and that is that parents have the ultimate right for what their child reads. And while the policy does not specifically address the how of that, we've put in place additional supports, access publicly to our libraries on every campus so you can see the books in them and what the summary of those books are, as well as individual access to parents to see what their child specifically has read and is checked out. And that's in support of this policy. And it's really important that we know this policy is founded on a relationship with parents for what their child can read. We specifically addressed and discussed selection material And we recognize in this policy the selection criteria that will be used not only for how we move to put books in our libraries, as well as what we look at if a book is challenged. A book is only banned in a process if that's what the challenge committee or reconsideration committee considers as the option. So it's not pre-banned in the first place. And I think sometimes that language gets interchanged. A book is challenged, meaning someone has a concern with it. So we have specific criteria in our selection process for that. Then when a book is challenged, that means someone does feel like, even though there's been selection criteria, there's a book that they have specific concerns with. We have two very specific processes in place for that. The first is informal, because again, we will sit down with the complainant and talk through that book. Why that book might have been there, how long that book has been there, and why it was chosen. We do that at the campus level if it's a parent, so we'll encourage them to start with their principal. If it's a community member, one of our district representatives will sit down and meet with them and talk through their concerns. If it is a parent, then the policy specifically will address, again, that option to restrict that book for their child. They have that process, that option prior to an informal process, but if there's still questions and they want to informally sit down and talk with someone, then we certainly will offer that. And then if they are wanting to restrict access to beyond their child, beyond what their control is, then we will go into a formal reconsideration process. That formal reconsideration process we have in place will ensure that there is a campus administrator, teacher, parent on that committee, as well as any other additional members that need to be there. It has a 5-person minimum, but that is a minimum. So if there needs to be additional perspectives, we will add that. However, we do want to stay at an odd number. Within that process, we will ask any committee member to review Exhibit B as part of this policy, and it's outlined for everyone to see what the committee will discuss. They'll come up with their own individual consideration based on having read the book in its entirety, and then from there, they will make a decision through vote as to whether the book will stay in the library, will be moved to a different grade level. So example of that could be a middle school might go to a high school, elementary could go to a middle school, or the book will be returned. During that process, before it goes to formal consideration, if the book is challenged in the informal process, the complainant does want to move it to formal, there will be an opportunity for a district administrator, a district librarian, and a campus administrator to review the book if it is claimed to be in violation of the penal code. If they see reasonableness for that potential violation, the book will be restricted to having access only for parent permission. Otherwise, the book does stay within access to all students until it is finalized through a process. If a book is challenged and removed from a library, or if it's returned to a library, so either way, if a book goes through a formal challenge process, at the end of that process, that book cannot be challenged for 5 years. So we discussed that and what would be the appropriateness. We've seen anything from 2 years to never being reconsidered, and we felt like 5 years was a place where we would recommend, and then it can be reconsidered. That is the overall of EFB. I do want to point out the Exhibit A for EFB library materials is specifically the form that a complainant would fill out. So we've made the questions public by putting in an exhibit so that everyone can see those will be the questions that a complainant would respond to, with specificity needing to be provided in where their concerns are, so that the committee Upon reviewing the challenge, will see that exhibit and truly understand where the complaint is coming from with specific pages and quotes. Exhibit B, as I mentioned earlier, will be the form that the committee uses. From there, we are also then proposing very similar policy for EFA, instructional materials, that specifically addresses instructional materials. The selection criterion questions are not as extensive as those in the library materials, but follow the same process. In addition, the process follows the same. We'll have an informal committee, or a formal committee, and then a challenge of 5 years. In an instructional materials, the change would be 5 years before it can be reconsidered, or if the materials goes back for a state adoption. So if there is a concern with a passage in a math book and we go through the process, but in 2 years, the state process reviews all math materials again, then we would obviously be less than our 5-year process. And we'll follow a state process. And that just varies depending on some instructional materials go through a state process and some do not. Again, with Exhibit A, Policy A and instructional materials, it will also have the same 2 exhibits. Exhibit A is for the complainant, and Exhibit B is for the committee. Those are the policies that we're bringing forward today after, again, much discussion through our policy committee and our study. Our study included policies from other districts, the TEA model, and then the TASB proposals.
Board, I want to add one thing on there. I know it's not common that we adopt exhibits. You don't adopt exhibits with every policy. These policies required some forms, and that is why we did it just like this. So there's a corresponding exhibit for both of the policies that Deanna mentioned, and both of those exhibits were heavily weighed in on from our board representation on the policy committee. So there was a specific reason that we are bringing this to you like this today.
Yeah, so on that point, right, we were very intentional about putting these exhibits in the policy. Because if they're in the policy, these exhibits cannot change without us. So that's the reason really for that exception, right? Usually something like this might be included in an administrative regulation or something like that, but we were explicit that we wanted to make sure that we knew what these forms were and that, a change would have to come through this body.
I do just want to add to that, in order to be respectful of how often we do come on both committees, the only thing that we left open for change is the checklist for Belton ISD campuses. So as we add a campus, we will be able to add that name onto the form without coming back. So just so you know, we did do that, but that is the only area in which we could change without coming back to the board.
All right, open it up to questions. Start with Ms. McDonald.
I don't have a question, I just have a comment. Really want to thank the policy committee. You all have been very thoughtful and intentional in your processes. Really want to thank our legal counsel. I know this has not been easy. I've listened to you all today, and I couldn't be more proud of the things that you all have done today. So thank you.
Sure, yeah. I said a lot earlier, but I think just to clear up a couple things, right? So we have had a policy in place for almost 30 years or more. And so this is a revision to what we had. When this topic really started to heat up last fall, last spring, and we had materials start to go through the process that we had, we found holes, there were holes, right? It was not a good process. It was not a process that would stand up to the test of time, and that's really what started us down this path. You might have heard comments that these materials are in the library and able to be checked out by students, and that they've been in the library and able to be checked out the students the entire time. You've heard comments that make it sound like there's hundreds of materials in our libraries that fall into the penal code categories. And I got to tell you that that's not true. And so when these materials, when the most controversial of the materials came up, is when we started going down the path of, can we pull a material, can we sideline a material? The language, you're right, sideline is maybe feels like a better term, right, a more accurate term. Can we sideline the material until, pending parent approval, right? Like that, we put that in place. Unfortunately, the policy that we had at the time didn't really say we could do that, right? And so I think there's been some misconception that, this material has been out in the libraries. The most controversial of the material has been out in the libraries and available. That's just not the case. But what we've done now is codify, right, what the right thing to do was, what we believe the right thing to do was at the policy level and not at the administrative regulation level, right, which is, I think, really where that decision was made last fall and last spring. And so I just, I don't know, when I sit here and feel like I get punched in the face for months after months and months, and some of the folks who are making the comments know full well that the material is not in the library available for checkout by general student. It just doesn't sit right. And so I want you all to know sort of what some of that history is that's leading to this policy.
I'll just be real quick. Just want to echo the sentiment of the thanks to the policy committee and to Dr. Smith or Dr. Love Smith. Good gracious, I need more coffee too. I don't have questions because I feel like y'all have kept us well informed, very well informed over the last several months that y'all have been studying this. And so I think when I've read through this policy, I think it's fair. Like what Janet has said, it's fair, it's thoughtful. And when I say thoughtful, you've thought about students, you've thought about parents, you've thought about our community and our values and beliefs. And I think it's comprehensive. And like you said, when we go through this process, we have something to stand on if we do end up needing to have something removed. And so I think it's great. And I think what I appreciate most is that parents are highlighted all over this, that especially there's a line in there what says the ultimate decision lies with the parents on what they want their students to read or not read. And the fact that we've also been able to provide access to any person, whether you live in our district or not, you have access to what we have at our libraries. And I've really appreciated that because I've utilized that myself for my own kids. And so I'm thankful for that. I think I'm proud of the work that's been done. And so again, just appreciate the policy committee. I know y'all have done the most of the work here and y'all have done a really great job.
Well, when you're last, everybody's already said all the good stuff, so I can't follow what you guys have said and say anything better. I'm proud of you guys, but I'm glad we're here.
Yeah.
It's time.
Yep.
I do want to make a special thank you to Dr. Lovesmith. You have really taken it on the chin in this, and I pray for you. I pray for all of us, but I pray for you. I know this has been really difficult. You're still going to be at the forefront of this. It's not now, but at least now we're moving forward in a positive direction. But I want to tell you how much I appreciate what you've done for all of us. Dr. Smith, your team, I trust you guys. You guys represent our district in a way that I'm proud of every day. I'm glad to be part of the team of 8. So I'm glad we're here.
Well, I'm actually technically last, so I'm the one who has nothing left to say, except for what everybody has already said. A big thank you. What a balance you had to strike, and it is hard. Through this entire thing, you put parents first, and I think that is something that Belton stands next to. It's the parents, it's the kids, it's the community. But as I told somebody the other day, even with all that, the First Amendment exists not to protect the speech that I like, but the speech that I don't like. And you struck such a balance. And I think what's really important in this, the way that y'all crafted this, so much of the work that we do is to go forward when none of us are sitting up here anymore. And you've crafted a policy that I really believe that for the future coming, it's drafted. the next boards that come on, and I hate to put it this way, but if you were to get an activist board that wanted to start banning books or doing, no, there's a policy in place, and that is so, and I'm not a big policy process person, but that policy protects the kids, it protects the parents, it protects everybody involved. It's fair, and what a balance y'all struck. You know, they had teams of lawyers at TEA put together their policy, and I read through as much of it as I could. I can say this, you know, we had two lawyers, Mr. Alcozer and our counsel, that helped draft this. We had two. I'm pretty sure TA had many more than that. I think this is so much more superior than what was handed down by the state. I think that it respects parents, it respects the First Amendment, and just thank you. So with that, do we have a motion to approve the replacement of EF local with EFA local, EFA exhibit, EFB local, and EFB exhibit as presented? Ms. McDonald? Ms. Bass, all in favor? All right, that passes unanimously. Thank you very much. There being no further business,